Hello again, and welcome to another Trial Site News interview. I'm your host, Brandon, and today we're joined by attorney Tricia Lindsay. Miss Lindsay is representing Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s Children's Health Defense, along with a group of parents, in a lawsuit regarding parental consent for vaccination. This lawsuit was filed in the Eastern District of Pennsylvania against the City of Philadelphia, its Department of Public Health, and Commissioner Dr. Cheryl Bedegal over an emergency regulation created during the COVID-19 pandemic, allowing vaccination of children 11 years old and over without any parental consent. Miss Lindsay, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. It's a very important topic.
Agreed. Can you take us through the background of this case and how your office became involved leading up to the filing of this case on November 1st?
Sure. So this is a case, it's not about vaccine science, but it's a case that has really been brought to protect the health and welfare of children and to pretty much shore up the protections of parental rights, which is completely under attack in this with this lawsuit. I became involved because of my background. I mean, I'm familiar with Children's Health Defense, became even more familiar with them during the pandemic, with all the rallies and things of that nature, as COVID was being COVID was announced and the mandates began, which were all violations of constitutional, federal law, state laws, numerous laws. And so I began working with them to a certain extent, speaking at different rallies, speaking out at different events, fighting for the rights of children and the rights of we the people in this country, and speaking up about the violations of law with regards to children. And then the vaccine was rolled out, and that increased our efforts even more. And so we were on the same platforms, at the same events, in meetings, speaking as attorneys, conferring to figure out what to do and how, we can impact this fight and to protect the citizens. And I have a background in education. I was in education for 20 plus years. Plus I have a nursing degree. That was my first degree. So for me, I see the perspective from multiple sides. I'm a parent, I'm a former educator, administrator, I have a nursing degree, so I understand the science behind it. And then the civil rights and constitutional piece is in my legal arena, when I made the jump from education into the legal arena in order to tackle really education legislation in this country. I had no idea that it was going to lead me to this platform at this particular moment in time. And so that's how I became involved. I'm an avid advocate for children. I speak out. I will fight for them tooth and nail. That's what I've always done, and I will continue to do, because they are the most vulnerable besides our elderly in our society, and they need to be protected.
Yeah. The emergency regulation in question here for this case, enacted in May of 2021, and I'm going to summarize the title of it. The emergency regulation for governing the immunization and treatment of newborns, children, and adolescents. Can you summarize the intent of this emergency regulation?
Well, when it was first introduced, it was 2019, the emergency reg, but it pretty much piggybacked on a minor consent regulation that the city of Philadelphia, that Pennsylvania had in place from prior to that. In 2007, they had the minor consent regulation that was already in place. And then when COVID came around, COVID pretty much piggybacked on that. And in essence, what it says is that 11-year-olds children as young as 11 years old can consent to a medical treatment without parental knowledge or consent, which is absurd because children need to be given informed consent, right? The parents, anyone that decides to take on a medical treatment, to undergo a medical treatment, be it a vaccine or surgery or invasive procedure, whatever type of procedure, you are given informed consent. At least you're supposed to be given informed consent. And so for a child of 11 years old for the regulation to assert or imply that a child as young as 11 years old can give informed consent, it's a bit of a stretch, and it doesn't make any common sense. right? Because what it's implying is that a child will be given this information, that they will understand the information, yet there is no requirement that the child the child that it's recorded anywhere, that they were given informed consent. There is no assessment in place to determine if this child understands what they have been told or understood what they were told. And there was actually, when with the COVID vaccine in particular, just prior to the filing of this consent is when a vaccine information sheet came out. When the regulation, I'm sorry, when the regulation was first passed, there was no vaccine information sheet for the COVID-19 vaccine. So then what information would have been given to these children or were given to these children, right? There was only what was called a caregiver fact sheet. And the caregiver fact sheet was not written in a way that an 11-year-old could understand the terminology or the subject therein. Most adults don't even understand medical terminology,
Right.
when it comes down to medical treatment and adverse implications, adverse effects. And so to expect an 11-year-old or to imply that an 11-year-old can understand that doesn't make any sense. And now the vaccine information sheet that was issued just prior to the filing of our lawsuit is still for 12-year-old children and up. So still the 11-year-old is still going to be given a fact sheet or a vaccine information sheet that they're not going to be able to understand.
Reading a summary of this case, your argument is the emergency regulation conflicts with the Childhood Vaccine Injury Act of 1986, which would be a direct violation of the U.S. Constitution's Supremacy Clause. Can you take us through some of the key parts of that 1986 Act in terms of the protection of children and parents?
One of the biggest parts of it is that Congress actually said that the informed consent has to be given by the parent or the legal representative of that child. And Congress defined that legal representative to be a parent or someone who is in the position of a parent. So it requires a legal guardian or parent to give informed consent, because the child cannot process this information. What 11-year-old knows their medical history, their familial history? What 11-year-old can understand adverse implications? What 11-year-old can understand? And this is not just about COVID, right? The minor consent regulation, it involves all vaccinations. It's just that the emergency reg brought in COVID. And so it piggybacked on top of a regulation that was already in place, which most parents do not know about. They are not aware of it. And so this case is that much more important, because it's not just about COVID, but it's about all the vaccinations, right? When you are considering medical care, you want to know clinical trials. You want to know how long the procedure has been in place, how many successes, how many failures, what are the possible long-term effects, what are the possible short-term effects, what are the alternatives, if there are any, what happens if I don't take it? You know, there's so many questions to ask. And an 11-year-old is not going to be able to enter that conversation intellectually. They're not mature enough to enter that conversation. They're not wise enough or informed enough to know what to ask, and then to process that, and then to weigh the benefits and the risks, and then to make an informed decision. So the minor consent regulations is in direct conflict with the 1986 Act. And there again, that act put in place provisions whereby harms that may come from any of these vaccines, parents can now, there's a pathway to redress those harms. And there are certain time limits with that. So if a child consents to a vaccine or a procedure and a parent is unaware, that parent, if a child presents with some adverse effect, if the parent is unaware of what the child did, then how do you identify the cause or the source of whatever that child is going through, or whatever is manifesting in that child? You don't even know what's manifesting, because you don't know what took place. And so the parent may lose their time, right? Their right to redress, because they're not going to be able to identify what's going on, or they may not identify it in time to meet the requirements that have been put in place for their protections. And so it's in direct conflict with federal law in that way, in those ways, I should say.
It's hard to believe that city leaders would think that that parents would be okay after finding out that their children were vaccinated. They were not given any warning in advance. Can you give us the perspective of parents involved in this case?
Oh, the parents are up in arms, at least the parents that I've spoken to, because it literally interrupts and removes their shield of protection, right? The average if I'm a mother, if my child is in any way of harm, any potential harm, if I know that can come to them because of any reason, I mean, from friends to anything that they can step. If a car is coming towards them in the street, I'm inclined to jump in front of them or grab them, whatever it is. I drive in a car. My daughter's 21, and if I stop short, even though she has on a seatbelt and I'm not Superwoman, my arm automatically goes out to hold her back, to protect her. That's the first thought. So how dare these city leaders think that they have the right to remove that parental shield from their child?
Right.
It is absurd. The parent is the guardian. They're the first line of defense, that you have to come to a parent to get to their child. And so what the city of Philadelphia is in essence doing, they're removing the parent from the equation. And they're saying that we're taking on that role. And that is a loss of parental rights, which you cannot do. You cannot remove a parent's right to the care, custody, and control of their children without a strong showing that that parent is unfit. And that takes a lot to do. It really does. And there has to be due process, and there is no due process here.
The pharmacists who vaccinated the children without any consent, do they play a role in this lawsuit?
Well, anyone that is a medical caregiver, right? If I walk into CVS today, right, they have clinics, especially with the flu season upon us. Now you can walk in and set up an appointment and get your COVID shot, get your flu shot, and what is it? The WellCare Clinic, I believe that's what it's called. And so absolutely, if pharmacists step into the role of where a parent belongs and determines that they are authorized to give a child this vaccine, any of these vaccines, without their parental knowledge or consent, then they are implicated in this, because they too are violating the rights of the parents. Ignorance of the law does not free you from being responsible for your actions. And so even if the regulation is in place, if they do something to harm those children, we will find a way to hold them all responsible. Absolutely.
Is there any other final closing comments you may have in regards to this case that we have not covered? Anything else you want to state in regards to this case?
The fact that Pennsylvania law has in place, and Philadelphia laws, whereby children cannot work without parental knowledge and consent, they cannot marry, they cannot they cannot consent to sexual acts, they cannot drive. There's so many laws in place that children are not allowed to do. They can't even enter a contract until a certain age. And most of these, you have a few that are at 16. Most ages of consent for any number of these privileges that I just mentioned or rights, they come into effect at 18 and 21. And so there are even education compulsory laws whereby children from 8 to 17 must be in school. They cannot drop out of school without the consent of a parent, right? Or the state, if by some chance that our minor has become emancipated, which that is a process in itself. So how is it that we are removing the parental shield, the right to the care, custody, and control, and to direct that care, custody, and control of a child from the parent, and in essence, removing the protections from the child? To do that is going to lead to nothing but chaos. You have these schools and the school districts in the city of Philadelphia and these organizations that are setting up fairs and carnivals and all these events whereby I call it indoctrination. They're indoctrinating children to in turn indoctrinate other children about COVID vaccine. They're giving them misinformation. And in essence, what they're doing is they're pitting them against their parents. Because if I'm a parent and I'm saying this is where we stand with regards to medical care, this is what happens, this is how my home is set up. You have to, I give certain permission. You have to come to me and discuss these matters, and I will determine what is in your best interest with regards to your medical care. And then they go to school, and there's a school official or a city official that's interrupting that and telling them the opposite. You're in essence pitting my child against me. And now you're going to bring chaos into my home, right? And so now you have the breakdown of the familial unit. And so now you have chaos in society. And so what happens? Who's winning here? Because the child is not winning and the parent's not winning. So who's winning? And so it's a direct attack on the family. It's a direct attack on parental rights. And it has nothing to do with the health and welfare of children. It has everything to do with domination and control. And that's what this is about. Because if it had to do with the health and welfare of the children, you would leave that decision making to the parent, and especially a parent who has not been deemed to be unfit. A parent who cares for that child or their children and are doing the job that is called for as a parent.
Attorney Tricia Lindsay, please keep us informed as this case proceeds. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
For more unbiased news and opinion articles on the latest in scientific research, please visit trialsitenews.com.